Breaking news. The New York High Court just delivered a major victory for voters in New York and a huge loss for Republican vote suppressors that could have implications for control of the U.S. House of Representatives in January. This is Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started. Just moments ago, New York's highest court just upheld the state's new early mail-in voting law. Marc, tell us what this law does and why Republicans were challenging it in court.
So Republicans were challenging it in court because this essentially allows people to, as the title says, vote early by mail. So it is not a true vote by mail law, but it is the functional equivalent of a vote by mail law by letting people get essentially a mail-in ballot or get their ballot early and then cast it by mail. And Republicans have been fighting this law tooth and nail to try to argue that it violated the New York State Constitution, which they said requires only in-person voting on Election Day. So that is the argument that they made. They lost it in a huge 6-1 decision today that paves the way, frankly, for not only this law, but really throws the doors open for New York to pass further voting rights legislation to make voting even easier and simpler in the future. And let's hope they do.
Marc, this lawsuit also came less than a month after the RNC kicked off their official Bank Your Vote program, where they encouraged people to vote early and by mail in the 2024 election.
Yeah, I mean, look, the hypocrisy of the Republican Party is outshined only by their cravenness. You know, the same time that they are in court in New York trying to take away people's ability to vote in this fashion, they are promoting these cheap nonsense websites to try to lull the mainstream media into believing and into reporting that, oh, no, the Republican Party really does like early voting. Oh, yeah, no, the Republican Party really does want people to vote by mail. It's nonsense. It's not just nonsense because of this case in New York. It's nonsense because, Paige, of the cases that you and I have covered extensively in states like Nevada, in Arizona, in Mississippi. You know, as we record this, we are waiting on on decisions from courts of appeals around the country because Republicans are trying to make it harder to vote by mail. And it is about time that people stop paying attention to these cheap websites and gimmicks and start paying attention to what their high-priced lawyers are saying in courtrooms around the country. But I am happy to say, I am thrilled to say that at least in the Empire State, Paige, the state of my birth, the state where you spent a lot of time, we had a huge victory for voters and voting rights and a big setback for the RNC, Elise Stefanik, the New York Republican Party, the National Republican Congressional Committee. You know, I'm waiting. I'm getting ready. I'm getting ready to put on my suit and tie for the Hakeem Jeffries swearing-in parties.
Marc, you mentioned that this was a blowout decision from New York's highest court, the Court of Appeals. It was 6-1. How did the Republicans' lawsuit fare throughout other levels of the state court system?
Well, they lost everywhere. I mean, you know, they lost at the trial court, they lost in the intermediate court, they lost the high court. I mean, they have lost and lost and lost, which is, you know, both typical, right? They tend to lose a lot of lawsuits. You know, that's like one of their things their lawyers are best at.
One of their trademarks of Republican litigation.
Their lawyers should trademark losing voting rights cases. I like that. But it is also a sign, though, of how desperate they have become. You know, in recent days, it is clear that they think they are losing. You know, they think that Kamala Harris has added a sense of energy and dynamism to the race, which she has. Democratic fortunes in the House and the Senate have improved as well. But remember, the Republicans, in order to keep control of the House, needed to do well in New York all along. I mean, even before the most recent change at the top of the ticket for president, the control of the U.S. House goes through New York, which is why they fought so hard over redistricting. And we've talked about how they lost that, but also in these various voting cases. And this is the biggest of the lot. This is a huge setback to their efforts to maintain control of the House. And, I am proud of the job that my law firm did in litigating this case. So kudos to Aria Branch and the other lawyers who did this. But also, for people who have subscribed to Democracy Docket, you have been aware that this has been going on. So kudos to the Democracy Docket team that produces a wonderful free daily and weekly newsletter that I hope everyone signs up for.
Marc, you mentioned that control of the U.S. House kind of runs through New York this fall. Why would Republicans spend the time and resources to try to block this law? I mean, we think of New York as a pretty blue state as is. So wouldn't expanding voting options actually help Republicans? Wouldn't they want more people to be able to cast their ballots this fall?
Paige, you make a really insightful point, and I hope it's one people really focus in on. The status quo in New York is that Democrats control the governorship, both Senate seats, a majority of the state legislative seats. And so you would think that the party that is trying to upset that status quo would welcome new ways to, as you say, expand the electorate, right? Expand their opportunities to build out opportunities to gain power. And you don't have to look that long in the past to see where Republicans did this. Florida was a state that Democrats used to have huge success at the statewide level, and it was Susie Weil, one of the campaign managers for Donald Trump, who actually was part of the team that pioneered the use of vote by mail, permanent voting by mail lists, to give Republicans a way to catch up to Democrats and eventually win the governorship and win control of the legislature. I mean, don't get me started about gerrymandering there, but they used vote by mail as a way to expand their electorate. Well, in the era of Donald Trump, that is all behind them. The Republican Party has bought into the big lie. The Republican Party has bought into election denialism. The Republican Party has bought into a grievance mentality whereby they believe that any access to voting is somehow disadvantaging them. And what it is doing, it is in some ways suppressing their own voters. It is in many respects inhibiting their voters from taking advantage of these tools that otherwise don't have a partisan advantage. I mean, there's nothing inherent in vote by mail that would say it is better for Democrats. In fact, you could argue that the people who benefit most by vote by mail are older voters who tend to be more Republican than younger voters, and rural voters, right, who have further to go to their polls. But yet Republicans have managed to so screw this message up that they have turned this into a Democratic advantage. And I think we're going to see that advantage in New York in 2024. We're going to see that advantage around the country in 2024, because despite these gimmicks coming out of the RNC, Donald Trump is still bad-mouthing vote by mail and early voting.
Marc, I also want to highlight that this lawsuit was originally filed in September of 2023. It is now August 2024. It has worked its way through the entire New York state court system. What does it say that, New York acted so quickly to respond to this lawsuit, to figure out what the laws around vote by mail would be for elections this fall? And what lessons can we learn from that?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a good example of how the courts, when they want to solve the problems of voting and democracy, can solve the problems of voting and democracy. I mean, you skipped over one of my favorite dates in all of this, which is that Republicans tried to block this law in time for the George Santos vacancy special election in February, and they failed. It's timely in light of George Santos's pleading guilty to the crimes. It's worth mentioning that they tried to use this as a voter suppression technique lawsuit. At that time, they failed, and they lost that House seat. They lost a Republican-controlled House seat to a Democrat. But it shows that the courts have been able, both in the run-up to that special election and now in the run-up to November, they were able to turn this lawsuit around really fast and get really thoughtful decisions out of it, produced and on paper in time before that special election and now before the November election. So it shows that courts, when they want to, they can be part of the solution against Republican voter suppression, against election denialism, and they can help protect voting rights.
The final point I want to make about this lawsuit and this situation is that it took until September 2023 for New York to institute a form of early voting and mail-in voting for everyone in the state. As we said, New York is a blue state. It has been a blue state for a long time. It has a Democratic trifecta. Why didn't lawmakers act earlier to increase ballot access for New Yorkers?
Yeah, it's a great question. And look, you know, I joke about the fact that I'm born and raised in New York and you've lived in New York. The fact is, New York has not had the best voting laws. They still don't have the best voting laws. The fact is, you know, my law firm had to sue to strike down their ban on food and water for people waiting in line to vote on behalf of the Brooklyn branch of the NAACP. There's no reason why a Democratic-controlled legislature had that law on the books, even though it was old. They could have repealed it. And there's a lot more things they can do. And the good news, Paige, the good news is that one of the things that this court makes clear in this opinion is that the power of the legislature to fix the problems of voting in New York is, in their words, plenary. What does that mean? It means it is without limit. Okay, there is no excuse. Part of why New York's legislature would say they had not done this sooner or been bolder is because they would have said, well, the state constitution limited their ability to do this. The court, in today's opinion, said that's not true, that the Constitution doesn't limit it. So here is my challenge to the New York State legislature and the governor. Pick this up and run with it. You know, this is your opportunity to modernize your voting laws, to enfranchise all New Yorkers. This is your opportunity to remove barriers to registration, remove barriers to voting, remove barriers to people's ballots counting and being certified in a timely and accurate way. The sky is the limit. Be an example for America. Be a shining example of what other states should aspire to. So New York needs to take this case and be thrilled with the outcome. I am thrilled with the outcome. It is great for voters, but it should be an example of the limitless possibility when legislatures put their mind to it to improve the quality of our democracy. So that is the charge for New York moving forward. Thank you, everyone, for joining this edition of Democracy Docket. Please make sure you are subscribed to our free daily and weekly newsletters. The link is in the show notes below.